Hi, this is jazz guitarist Tom Lippincott, and you're listening to GMI.
That's right, folks. Wherever you are in the world listening to this, a very warm welcome to GMI. My name is Jed Brocky, and as you've heard, today I'm talking to jazz guitarist Tom Lippincott from the USA. Tom is an incredibly talented guitar player, and I was looking for a wide-ranging interview. However, we started talking about his 8-string guitar, and we really didn't get much further than that. So this whole episode is almost entirely devoted to talking about Tom's 8-string guitar, which is quite an instrument and something you've got to hear and see. I'm hopeful that we'll have another podcast with him. He's got a very busy schedule, but fingers crossed. Some news for Alexa owners. If you own an Alexa, you can now actually command Alexa to open the GMI podcast. How cool is that? All you have to do is simply say, Alexa, open GMI, Guitar Music Institute, or you can say, Alexa, start GMI, Guitar Music Institute, and the current podcast episode will play. Now, there are a whole lot of other commands available, skipping between episodes, moving forward and back, and I've put that on the GMI website at www.guitarmusicinstitute.com with the current and any future podcast episodes. The last thing to say is that just by listening to this podcast, you can get 15% off at the gmiguitarshop.com. Got a very large range of guitar aids, lessons, books and more, and all you need to do is to choose whatever you wish, and at the end where you've got your basket, put in the code just as you're checking out. All you need to put in is GMI01. All of these details are available on the website. Okay, let's get right into today's podcast interview with jazz guitarist Tom Lippincott. Tom, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us.
I'm happy to be here.
For the listeners around the world, the reason I came across Tom was because in another part of my life, I actually teach students to play guitar. And I came across an article or a PDF by Tom, which was fantastic. Why recreate something that's already done? And I got in touch with him, and he very kindly allowed me to share that with my students. So here we are. The first thing I really wanted to talk about, Tom, and you probably get this all the time, but I'll ask you anyway, the 8-string guitar. Now, I was lucky enough to see George Van Epps with a 7-string guitar live way back in 1987. You play an 8-string guitar. Could you maybe talk the listeners through that and how it works and how it came about?
Absolutely. Yeah, as you mentioned, I do get lots of questions about it. People come up to me at gigs all the time and say, how many strings are on that thing? You know, and my usual glib answer is, I can't count that high. I'm a guitar player. Basically, it goes back to one of the guys you mentioned, George Van Epps, has for a long time been a big hero of mine. And as you know, a lot of jazz guitar players know, he was famous for pioneering the 7-string guitar, and he had a low A string. So I hadn't actually thought about getting a 7-string guitar with that tuning, really, but I was always a huge George Van Epps fan. And a little bit later on, I also was introduced to the music of Lenny Breau. It's kind of funny with Lenny Breau because when I was a teenager, I used to read Guitar Player magazine, and he had a article, or what do you call that, a column in Guitar Player, and I always remember reading it said fingerstyle jazz guitar, and at the time I was getting into Joe Pass and John McLaughlin and maybe John Schofield, people like that, and when I saw the word fingerstyle, it said to me, oh, he must be playing like some kind of old-fashioned like ragtime or something. So I was totally not interested, you know. So it wasn't until a lot later on, a friend of mine, he was actually a bass player, but he's a pretty smart guy and, you know, interested in a lot of different things. And he asked me, have you ever heard Lenny Breau? And I said, well, I know the name and, you know, have heard about him. He said, oh man, you should check him out. I've got these recordings of him that I found, and he played me some stuff, and I was just completely blown away the first time I heard. You know, it sounded like there was 2 guitar players playing, what people usually say when their initial reaction. So I became an immediate huge fan. I just loved him. Yeah. And this was probably when I was in my mid to late 20s. And I had already been playing some classical guitar, so I was a little bit familiar with playing with my fingers. And I was also a huge fanatic of piano players, and specifically Bill Evans. And then I pretty quickly found out that, Bill Evans was Lenny Breaux's big hero. So it definitely was, kind of only natural that I became a huge Lenny fan. So this same friend of mine, I think at some point mentioned, have you ever thought about playing a 7-string guitar?
No, but I have thought about playing an 8-string.
Right. Yeah. And the thought hadn't even occurred to me, but I love Lenny's playing so much, and Bill Evans and a bunch of other piano players, Keith Jarrett, Brad Meldau. And I thought, that would be pretty cool. It would be a pretty big commitment. And this friend of mine was one of these guys that always does tons of research. And he was always sending me literature from guitar companies that made this guitar custom or that or whatever. So he almost kind of twisted my arm and talked me into it. And my initial attempt was I was going to try to do it on the cheap because I was broke. And I bought a guitar body. It was a Telecaster body. And from my friend, I got connected with this guitar builder in California who would, I think he offered to build me an 8-string neck for really inexpensive. It was like, I don't know, $200. I can't really remember what it was, but it was something like that. So I said, sure, I'll take a gamble. And I got the neck in the mail and I was all excited. And when I first tried to put it on the guitar and kind of start to work out some of the math, I suddenly realized that the neck was too narrow to fit the strings on the upper frets. It didn't really have that taper that most necks do. And there was just no way I'd be able to make it to work. The string spacing would have to be so close together to fit 8 strings on it that it would just be impractical. So I kind of gave up on that. And then fairly shortly after that, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself here. I forgot to mention why I settled on 8 strings in the first place. So my initial idea was just to buy a 7-string guitar. And at the time, Steve Vai was kind of famous for playing 7-string, I think with a low B. And there were a lot of, like, Ibanez had several 7-string models, and a few other companies had come out with them. So I thought, this is easy. I'll just buy kind of the least expensive 7-string guitar I can find and tune it like Lenny. And after I did an experiment or two on one of my regular guitars trying to tune a string up to a high A, I immediately realized that was not going to work. Even on a Gibson scale guitar, which is, a shorter than a Fender scale, I could only get the string up to about an A flat before it would break.
Can you just explain to the listeners what you mean by scale, Tom?
Okay. Scale simply means the distance, how long the string is from the nut to the bridge, the length of the string that vibrates. And it has to do with physics. And one thing I usually tell people if they're puzzled about this is if you look inside of a piano, you'll see immediately that the high strings are really short and the low strings are really long. And that's just kind of the way physics works. It's really hard to tune a string really high that's really long. And if you have a string that's really short and tune it really low, it's usually really floppy and barely works at all. So generally speaking, with any stringed instrument, the higher the pitch is, the shorter the string is. Like a violin or a mandolin are very short string lengths, and let's say an electric bass will be much longer. So my initial idea that, I could just take a off-the-rack 7-string and make it work was kind of a bust. So the next step was to realize that I was going to have to do some kind of custom thing. And that's when I hit on the idea of making that guitar on the cheap. And then I thought, well, if I'm designing it from the ground up, I can do anything I want. It doesn't just have to be a 7-string guitar off the rack. And of course, because I was a George Van Epps fan, I thought, well, since I'm, going this far, I might as well try the low string as well and see what happens. So that was how I kind of hit on the idea. Of course, I already told the story about the first big failure. So I called a few companies, and I remember talking to a couple of luthiers in person, and the biggest memory I have is being laughed at.
Yeah.
I seriously had one guy just like bust up laughing when I said, would you ever be interested in building an 8-string guitar? And he said, are you kidding? I've got so many orders for 6 strings and I've got all my equipment set up for that. Why would I want to do some crazy thing like that would basically be a money loser for me? So I was a little bit discouraged, but eventually I found this guitar builder, Bill Conklin. who's in Springfield, Missouri. There was actually another guy who's probably more well-known, especially for the multi-string thing, which is Ralph Novak in California that builds Novak's guitars. His claim to fame is Charlie Hunter, but he was a lot more expensive. So in between the two guys, those were the two that I found that, were actually willing to build what I wanted to have built. And Bill Conklin's prices were much lower, and he was also really good about spending a lot of time with me and finding out exactly what I wanted. And he seemed genuinely excited about the project, not just like I was another, customer that would ka-ching in the cash register.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a natural decision to go with him. And so that's what happened. I had him build the guitar.
Just on that, Tom, about 5 years ago, I was thinking about getting a guitar built for myself. And once I actually looked into it, I realised it was never going to happen. One was on price, but secondly, it was on lead time. The amount of time. I don't know why everyone isn't building guitars. They all seem to have a lead time of about a couple of years.
Yeah.
What was the lead time for you on building this very specific instrument?
I don't remember specifically, but I remember that it was really good compared to what most people are. I'm pretty sure it was less than a year. And there's actually kind of an interesting story about that as well, if you want to hear it.
Absolutely.
I, had commissioned him to have the guitar built, and he was working on it. And actually, also, I have to say, he was really great about giving me updates along the way and letting me know, we've got to this stage and we've got this much time left and so forth.
Sorry, when you commissioned the guitar builder to do this, did you give him anything more than I want an 8-string guitar? Did you give him other specifications? I want this, I want that.
Yeah, I gave him some pretty specific stuff. For one thing, a third person that I'll mention that is also a huge hero of mine is Ted Green. And if you're familiar with him, he's most well known for playing Telecasters. And so that was the third idea that I had with this guitar, is I wanted to make it sort of like a Ted Green Telecaster with a Lenny Breau high A string and a George Van Epps low string. So I wanted to make the guitar somewhat like a Telecaster. So Bill Conklin had a body shape that he already made that was not exactly a Telecaster, but it was pretty close. And we talked back and forth. I originally wanted a maple fingerboard, and he kind of talked me out of that. He said, I forget what the reasons were, but he convinced me that I should go with, I don't even know for sure. I'm pretty sure it's rosewood, but it might be something slightly more exotic than that, but it's that dark colored wood that looks like rosewood. Anyway, that's what I ended up with. I've got this typical, I guess it's not really a Telecaster style bridge. It's more like the kind of bridge that would be on a hardtail Stratocaster, something along those lines, with the individual saddles, just 2 pickups, like a Les Paul style, like 2 humbucking pickups. And
lots of knobs.
And lots of notes, absolutely.
Not knobs, the
knobs, right. Oh, yeah, and that, at the time, I was playing a lot of guitar synthesizer, so one of the things that was really important to me was that I wanted this guitar, this new one, to have the capability to be a guitar synth controller. The bad news that I immediately found out is that all guitar synths that are in production are only designed to accommodate 6 strings. So Bill actually told me that if I wanted to use it with all 8 strings, what I'd have to do is have some kind of a splitter box built that I could plug into and then use 2 guitar synthesizers. And I thought, that's, kind of too bad. But at the time I thought, okay, whatever, I'll go with it.
Were you looking at the Axion at the time?
I think I knew someone that had one and I tried it out. Yeah, that was one I checked out. But at the time I owned a Roland
GR303.
Well, later on, I bought a GR300, the old vintage one that Pat Metheny plays.
Sorry, yeah, I don't know why I said 303. Yeah, 300. Yeah.
I think the 303 might actually be one of the controllers that they made for that.
Right. Okay. I had one of those, and I thought I want to be like Pat Metheny. And after 15, well, not 15 minutes, but after a couple of weeks, I thought, what's the point of me sounding like a bad Pat Metheny?
Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing, but. The thing that happened with me, and I'm kind of jumping around here on subjects, but the one thing I loved about the GR300, the thing I hated about it was exactly what you were talking about. You couldn't hear somebody play one without immediately thinking, oh, he's trying to sound like Pat Metheny. I know exactly why Pat loves that particular synth so much. It's because it's so expressive compared to most of the other synths that are out there. especially the more modern varieties that use MIDI, you're basically just triggering a sample. So you're not really touching the note when you play it. You're just kind of pressing a button, starting a recording, and then add to that the mechanical difficulties of converting guitar string signal into MIDI, and there's these false notes that happen and so forth. So the Roland GR300 doesn't have any of that stuff. It uses the actual signal from the string and processes it to make it sound like a synth. Yeah.
Have you heard of Roland's Cosm? They gave me a box, the Cosm VG 800 or something.
Yes.
Is it working more on that sort of...
Absolutely, yes.
Right.
Yeah, a friend of mine had the VG8, which was, I think, the first one they made.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Same idea.
So it's something to do with the vibrations of the string is as opposed to taking the data and then, I'm running out of words on how to actually... You tell them how to do it, how it does it, Tom.
Yeah, the traditional... or the typical guitar synthesizer is basically what they call pitch to MIDI, where when you play a note on the guitar, the electronic components in the synthesizer unit read the pitch, which means that it takes a split second for it to read. It's got to go through, I think, 2 cycles of vibration for it to hear what the pitch is. And then it takes that information, converts it to ones and zeros, and changes it to MIDI. And then you can use that to trigger a sample, which is exactly how a keyboard synthesizer works. But the problem with that is, just like with a keyboard synth, there's only so much expressiveness that you can take advantage of. All the little subtle things that we guitar players do to add life to the notes that we play.
The nuances.
Yeah, the nuances are kind of missing when you're going through that process. And I always kind of felt like I was, playing the guitar with gloves on or something. It was like one step removed from me and the music. But initially I was so knocked out by the fact that I could play something on my guitar and hear a symphony orchestra or a vibraphone or a trumpet or just some new sound that, like a synth sound. That was so addictive that I really got into it for probably about 10 years.
Were you like me in that after that initial glow period, you actually realised that you can't really beat the sound of an acoustic or an electric guitar?
Yeah.
There's something boring about it to me, eventually, about those sounds. I don't know what it is in the actual signal itself, but it sort of, you eventually get bored with it. Whereas I've never got bored with a nylon string, a steel string, or just a straight sounding guitar through an amp. I just don't understand why that is.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. And I think it's exactly what we were talking about, that the nuances are lost, and there's only so much variety from note to note when you're playing. You can change the volume level, definitely, by how hard you pick or how soft it sends that MIDI information. And really fancy samples will even take, like, if, let's say, you're playing a piano sample and it's a really nice one that was done with a lot of care, they will sample the piano, like playing the note C at a really loud volume level and then a medium level and a quiet level. But the thing is, an acoustic piano, each note's going to sound different depending on what else is going on. What are you playing 12 notes at once? Are you playing one note? Are you playing 3 notes? Is there a loud drummer next to you? And the piano is going to sound totally different in each of those different contexts. And none of that gets translated, even in the absolute most nicely done samples. You only get a fraction of those details. So
we're a pair of blethers, and this is brilliant because we're going all over the place. But the 8-string guitar, did you go for the MIDI?
I did, and so I had him set it up so that I could trigger the highest 6 strings, because I figured that was the best bet. I was going to mostly want to use it for solos or maybe comping, and not so much for playing bass, I thought. So I had it done that way. And then I thought that eventually maybe I would get that splitter box and do that whole thing. But oddly enough, right around the time that I got that guitar was when I was starting to really get burnt out on synthesizer in general anyway. So it just became obvious pretty quickly that it wasn't going to be worth all that trouble to do that when I was kind of losing interest in guitar synth anyway.
So can I ask you a simple question? What, for the listeners out there, Tom, what is the tuning of the 8 strings?
Okay, so yeah, that is one of the first questions I always get too. These days, a lot of people assume that I've got a low B string and a low F sharp because of all the progressive metal players out there that are using that tuning. But no, I've got the inner 6 strings are exactly like a regular guitar, just your E, B, G, D, A, E. And then I've got on the lowest note below the low E string, a fourth below, is a B, which now that may sound strange because I was just talking about wanting to imitate George Van Epps, who used a low A. When I got that guitar, I tried both. I tried the A and the B, and I just decided that I felt like the B made more sense for me. I liked the idea that it continued the fourths, and I wasn't so much, especially at that time, interested in using the low string for bass, to like imitate a bass player. I more just wanted to be able to play more of the stuff that piano players do. So I thought, a chord, like when you end a song that's in E flat on a 6-string guitar, there's always that, oh man, I wish I had that extra half step,
There.
Exactly. So just for stuff like that, I just wanted to have a little bit of extra range, but I liked the idea of keeping the fourth. So I just decided to go with the B instead of the A.
So is that like in Spinal Tap when you just need that little bit more to push it over the cliff?
Yeah. Yes. I have a guitar that the low range goes to 11. And then on the top range of the guitar, some people that aren't real experienced with the guitar, when I say the high string, they assume I mean the one closest to the ceiling, but that the highest string in pitch is actually closest to the floor. So that's the one I'm talking about now, is an A, which is a perfect fourth above the normal high E string of a guitar. So it's basically, years ago, I was explaining this to a bass player, and he said, oh, it's just like a 6-string bass. And I realized, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, 4-string bass has the traditional 4-string tuning, and then a 6-string bass usually has one extra on each side, one high string and one low. And so, yeah, it's just the same idea. Just extend the range on both ends.
So getting back to George's way of doing it with an A,
mm-hmm.
I mean, do you think that was a mistake?
Absolutely not. No, for what he did, it worked great. And most jazz guitar players these days that play 7-string do use the low A, and there's a whole tradition involving that. A good friend of mine, Steve Herberman, who is a fellow Mike's Masterclasses instructor, he's a great 7-string guitar player who tunes to the low A, and he does great stuff with that. I could never assume to say, oh no, that's a mistake, he should tune to a B. As a matter of fact, that last time I played with him, I remember being really jealous of his B flat and his A whenever he would, play those low notes.
Is that the guy that there's a video of you playing Out of Nowhere?
Yes, that's Steve.
He's got a really nice guitar he's got. I didn't notice if that was a 7-string, a blue, was it a blue guitar? No, maybe not.
Red Sunburst, but that one, I believe, was made by Bill Cummins.
Right, okay.
And he has a really nice guitar, and he makes it sound great too. I don't know if you've ever heard that old story about Chet Atkins, that he was playing guitar and somebody walked up to him and said, Chet, that guitar sounds great. And so he put it on the guitar stand and said, how's it sound now?
I'm going to remember that one.
I just feel self-conscious, but, like that, somebody's guitar sounds great. And it would be implied that I'm saying that it's the guitar, not the player, that sounds great.
Now, are you trailblazing here? There are lots of people wanting to play 8-string guitar or 7-string guitar where there's an extra string on top?
Not so much. I really have run across very few people. In my travels, I'm sure you can imagine that I've, the people that are out there, I think most of them I've run across just because it's such a rarity that we usually find each other somehow. There was a guy in Canada years ago that I read about. I don't think I ever actually talked to him, and I honestly don't remember his name either, but he was doing the exact tuning that I was doing. There was a guy that I talked to, I wish I could remember his name. I know he was from Sweden, and he had lived in New York for a little while, and he played a 9-string guitar that was my tuning plus the low F sharp. Johnny Johansson, I think, was his name.
Well done.
I think.
You're missing a trick here, Tom. This is the beginning of a sort of a niche within a niche, or as you guys say, a niche within a niche. Yeah. the 8-string club.
Yeah, there really aren't that many people out there. I've Very rarely do I meet somebody. And I only once or twice even had a student who expressed any interest in it. And usually, well, part of that is I do try to encourage my students to do their own thing and not just, try to imitate me or some other hero of theirs. So I think a lot of them take that to heart and think, okay, that's Tom's thing is the 8th string. I'll do something else. But
here's a big question. It may just be that it's technology and the existing tools that already exist that has made the guitar 6 strings and people don't want to retool to go up to 8 strings. But what is the musical effect of having an 8-string guitar?
Well, it definitely expands my capabilities quite a bit. Just to give you a really quick, obvious example, if you want to, on a 6-string guitar, imagine if you wanted to play your low F, the first fret of the low E string, and let's say a high E at the 12th fret of the high E string, unless you have some,
Tal Farlow hands.
Yeah, or double Tal Farlow's hand. There's no way physically possible to do that. Whereas on my 8th string, it's super easy. I play my F would be at the 6th fret of the low B string, and that high E that's the same as the 12th fret high E string is simply at the 7th fret of the high A string. So I'm 2 frets apart. It's, on 2 ends of the fretboard, but it's really easy to grab those 2 notes.
So in terms of playing with other instruments, i.e. a bass player, do you find that the overtones start to clash, that you're just muddy in that lower range? How does that work?
Well, I could see how that would be very possible to be a problem, but my solution with that is if I'm playing with a bass player, first of all, I don't really play the low string very much at all, and I also tend to set my amp with not a whole lot of bass. I try to get more of a mid-range sound than a bass sound, and especially if I'm playing with a bass player. If I'm playing in a situation where there's no bass player, then I might want a little extra bass because I am often playing bass lines. But if I'm playing with a bass player, I'll try to stay out of his frequency range or her frequency range, both notes and also frequencies of, that I'm emphasizing in the notes that I am playing.
How often have you played with piano players who almost their whole careers have only played solo piano? Discuss.
Yeah, that's a kind of a sore subject for many guitar players, isn't it? There are lots of piano players out there who are kind of used to just playing everything. Even piano players that haven't just exclusively played solo piano, maybe a piano player who's been playing a long time with bands, but is really accustomed to being the only harmonic instrument. And, all of a sudden they're stuck with a guitar player and they just, don't know what to do with this annoying other instrument that's playing chords. So I have to say, well, first of all, jazz is my main focus. And I guess I consider myself a jazz musician if I had to label myself something. And the jazz tradition has, for a long time, guitar played a very minor role in that. Obviously there's a few really great towering figures in jazz guitar like Charlie Christian and Wes Montgomery and Jim Hall and so forth. But during those time periods, those guys were more outliers than, the common thing. And so most piano players for most of the history of jazz were really accustomed to ruling the roost harmonically and being the only instrument that was playing chords. I think that has started to change. In the last maybe 20 or 30 years, guitar seems to me to have really come into its own in the jazz world. And now if you go to New York and go to any jazz club, I'm going to bet that you're equally as likely to find a guitar player as the chord instrument in the band as you are a piano player. So I think younger piano players are more accustomed to playing with guitar, but I still encounter that pretty regularly, where
I think, and you've just mentioned him, a player that really helped me understand about playing with piano players is Wes Montgomery, because he approached it much more in a rhythmic fashion, didn't he, when there was a piano player there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes both ways, too. I don't mean to come off sounding like, all these, rude piano players won't let us have our harmonic room. I mean, we have to, by the same token, get along with them. And we have that added idea that we're pretty brand new at this thing of, being the harmonic instrument in a jazz group. They have this whole history, and we have to respect that and realize that, if I show up on a gig and there's a piano player and I've never met the piano player before, I have to kind of defer to that player and say, okay, I'm going to, let you do your thing, and then let's just see what happens. And if I play some chords, I'll keep it really low key and maybe just play small voicings, and sometimes won't even play chords at all and just, try to be more like a horn player. But then occasionally I'll have experience where, the piano player, it becomes immediately obvious that they want to interact with me, or maybe they'll drop out and let me comp for one of the other instruments or whatever. And then, okay, so, and then it's kind of a communication thing.
So, Tom, getting back to the 8-string guitar in terms of 7-string Lenny Brew, did Lenny have a low B or a low A?
Well, he just had the high string.
Was it the other one? Right, okay.
Yeah, so, and it was an A.
An A, okay, which is what you're doing.
Right, yeah, so that's a direct rip-off of Lenny Brew.
So, just before we move on to finding out how that 8-string guitar turned out and all that, I just wanted to talk to you about George Van Epps. You know the books? He brought out 3 books.
Yes.
I bought them all. I just couldn't use them. I haven't met anybody anywhere who's ever thought they were great ways to learn. Are you the first person in my life to have bought those books and thought, you know what, this is the best thing since sliced bread?
The short answer to that is no. I have read before that Kurt Rosenwinkel supposedly has gone through all 3 volumes, which wouldn't surprise me.
Give him a medal.
Yeah. And I also know my friend Steve, that we were talking about before, has also gone through all 3 of those volumes. And he's a huge George Van Epps fanatic. He loves all things George Van Epps. And he's really, I think, done a lot to continue that legacy. I think, he could almost be considered to be kind of the inheritor of the mantle, so to speak. Yeah, as for me, I do currently possess all 3 volumes.
You still got them. Well done.
They're on permanent loan from a couple of friends of mine, though. I've never actually bought them myself, I have to confess. But I did a couple of, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, over a summer, I tried going through the first volume, and I only got about, 60 or 70 pages in, and I really had a hard time continuing to keep momentum going.
I think it's the repetitive nature of the books and the exercises, and it's a long time since I've had them, and I gave them a good bash, and I tried because I really wanted to. I thought George was the most amazing guitar player and musician, so I really wanted. I was so excited when I heard these, and they were expensive, the books, but and it didn't stop me, even though I couldn't get through the first one, from buying the other 2, but it was just monotonous,
Yeah. My conclusion, and I still at some point hope that I can get motivated again to give it another go and get through all 3 volumes someday. Maybe not, I don't know, or at least maybe the first volume. But the takeaway for me was, I think that George Van Epps had an incredibly organized approach to counterpoint on the guitar. My theory about what's in those books, the idea behind them, is he basically is trying to give you every possible way to get from one note to another, and from 2 notes at the same time, this note and this, and 3 notes and so forth. And so going through everything in those books will give you so many combinations that you'll physically have to work out in your muscle memory, that his playing is a demonstration of what working on those books can do for you. He was able to improvise bass lines, chords, and melodies all at the same time, because it's such a complicated thing to do on guitar, but he had worked out all those combinations sort of ahead of time. Just like when you're improvising a single note line, you have to learn scales and licks and get your rhythm down and be able to swing and all that. And then when you're improvising, you're putting that stuff together in real time. You're not actually pulling it out of the clear blue sky. You're reorganizing materials that you've already worked on and already familiar with. So I think it's the same thing with that. And the thing that made me not able to continue with it was I found it to be, quite frankly, not that well organized. I thought it was kind of random, like, try this, try that, do this, and I didn't really see a clear narrative through all this stuff. I think you'd have to go through all 3 volumes to kind of see the big picture of how it all fits together.
I suppose it's interesting because you were talking about Ted Green earlier. When I bought his chord chemistry book, I think I was 16 or something, 17 when I bought it. There was something so approachable about that, although it was kind of random at the same time, you know, gazillion chords. But those sections at the back of the book really opened my eyes, and I guess it was a momentum thing, because I felt like, even though I wasn't a jazz player, I felt like I was heading towards being one. It was giving me big dollops of things that I could try and get immediate satisfaction from. I suppose we're almost into today's learning, aren't we?
Yeah. I'm a huge chord chemistry fan. I actually didn't get that book until a little bit later in my life. One of the very first, maybe even the very first guitar book I ever bought when I was probably like 14 was his first volume of single note soloing. And
that was tricky, that one.
Yeah, and I remember reading through it a few times, and I was such a terrible reader at that point that it was, like pulling teeth just to get through one example.
That book is actually written for people who can play.
Yeah. Exactly. So I kind of very quickly ran out of steam with that. And because of that, I won't say that I discounted Ted Green's other books, but I wasn't as interested in checking them out because of that experience. But then I can't remember exactly what made me want to get chord chemistry. I think somebody recommended it to me. And I think it was the year that I turned 30. I was actually doing an out-of-town gig on the island of Guam, which is in the South Pacific, and there's basically nothing to do during the day. So I practiced all day, every day during that summer, and that summer I brought that book with me, and I went through it from cover to cover, and was really an amazing experience for me. I got so much out of it. And I agree with you. The beginning part of the book that has just gazillions of chords that seem just kind of randomly thrown up was a little bit overwhelming. But because I had so much spare time, I'm going to go through every single one. And I found a bunch that I still play now. But the end part, like you said, it was just like really a great revelation of just kind of how music works and how the guitar works. There's a lot of great stuff in that end part. I almost recommend to people, if they want to check out chord chemistry, to start at the end of the book.
Yes, absolutely. Now, can you finish off on the 8-string? Because I've got a few other things. I could literally talk to you all day. I can't, and I know you can't. So can we finish off the 8-string, getting the guitar, and then there's a few other areas I just want to touch on. Maybe I'm enjoying this so much, maybe we could do this again sometime if you have the time. But anyway, the 8-string guitar.
So the story about picking up the guitar was the one that I think is kind of interesting, that might be worth relating. So I had the guitar built during the year about 2000 and into 2001. And right around the end of the summer of 2001, Bill Conklin was telling me that the guitar was going to be ready. Well, it just so happened I live in Florida, and my parents live where I had grown up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is in the middle of the U.S. So to go visit them, it was a plane trip. So I had gone to visit them around that time. It was actually the beginning of September. And while I was at my parents' house, September 11th happened. I remember my dad coming and waking me up and saying, "There's something big going on. You better come check this out."
Everybody can remember where they were. I know exactly where I was when that news came through.
Yeah. So, after the initial horror of it wore off, and we didn't think we were all going to die, because there was a day or two where we thought, oh, this is it, there's going to be a big nuclear war or what,
I came to the end of my life having achieved virtually nothing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure that's what I was thinking too. So the upshot was all the airlines had grounded all the airplanes, so I couldn't fly home on the ticket that I had to go home. And it just so happened that I got a call from Bill Conklin saying that my guitar was ready. So I was going to have to rent a car to drive back home anyway. And where his shop was, which is Springfield, Missouri, wasn't exactly on the way, but it wasn't that far off. So I thought, what a great opportunity. I'll save shipping. I won't have to pay to have the guitar shipped. And I can pick up the guitar and meet him and see where the guitar was built and everything. So that's exactly what I did. I went to his shop, saw some other guitars that he was building at the time, and got to hang out with him and meet him.
How nervous were you, Tom, before you saw and played and heard your new guitar?
I don't remember being nervous, but I was definitely very excited because it was something I'd been leading up to for several years with all this, all the research and the failed attempt and everything. The funny thing that happened was when I got there, he and a guy that worked for him were asking me questions about myself, and they said, "So you live in Florida? What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a musician." They said, "Yeah, but what do you do for a living?" And I said, "Well, I'm a musician." And they were just dumbfounded. They thought, "Wow, you play music for a living? Wow, that's amazing." They were super impressed. I guess in that part of the country, it's pretty rare. There's very little opportunity. I remember them telling me that there's this town, Branson, Missouri, that's kind of like a resort town. They said that's about the only place where anybody can, make any kind of living as a musician. So here these guys are super impressed that I'm this professional musician. Then they put this guitar in my hands, and I could barely even make
That's brilliant. That's absolutely
totally
brilliant.
unprepared for how lost I would be.
Yeah, I hope you said to them, you just don't understand what I'm playing. It's so far out there.
Yeah, it's so advanced that you can't it probably just sounds like a bunch of fluff noise and notes to you. But
that reminds me of, I used to play in this band called SGQ, Scottish Guitar Quartet. It wasn't classical music, it was a meld of all different sort of stuff. Okay. And I remember at half-time being outside, and I saw an old man and his wife coming out at half-time, and the music was just like littered, filled with melody. And I heard the old guys turn to his wife and said, "I never heard one bloody melody that whole set."
Yeah.
Anyway, so you got the guitar. Happy?
I was extremely happy, other than the fact that I totally sucked at playing it. It took me a lot longer than I thought it was going to get used to it. The one that really threw me was the high A string. But aside from just learning that string and where the notes were and everything, what I didn't realize up until I got that guitar was how much I depend physically on the sense of touch of where my finger or where my left hand is on the fingerboard, and even the palm of my hand touching the fingerboard, having my orientation of which string I'm on. That was completely destroyed.
You're taking my questions, Tom. That was exactly what I wanted to ask you, because it must feel weird for a long time that you've got that extra space.
Absolutely. And there was at least a year where I couldn't play the 8th string, and I couldn't play 6th string anymore either, because it screwed me up for that. So I was still playing my 6th string guitar on gigs, and then coming home and just practicing on the 8th string. And there was this really difficult breaking in period where I just felt like I couldn't play either instrument. And then I don't know how it happened, but somehow it sort of evened out, and I started getting more used to the 8th string after maybe a couple of years. And then maybe a year or two after that, the 6th string just started feeling like a toy. And I still do play 6th string guitar when I play anything other than jazz or classical music, if I'm playing rock or pop or country or blues or anything like that. And I still do a fair number of gigs where I do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's not exactly Mahavishnu, but there's the thing where it's all changing colours and everything, and you're playing a 6th string, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And there's so much in the rock and blues and country and funk vocabulary that's built around the way the guitar is tuned and set up, which doesn't happen as much in jazz because the harmonic model in jazz is piano. So it's not like there's tons of idiomatic jazz guitar things that I can't do anymore on 8th string guitar, because most jazz guitar players were kind of trying to imitate piano anyway. So yeah, I do find that playing other styles of music, I still prefer to play 6th string. And now at this point, I hardly ever practice 6th string guitar, and it just is like riding a bicycle for me when I pull it out, because I've still got a 6th string guitar inside of my 8th string anyway, so it's not like I'm losing touch with that.
Did you find that once you became spatially aware of this extra string bottom and top that it was affecting your musicality, and that you felt you had to use it initially because it was there?
There was a certain amount of that, although the initial thing that I tried to do was to just play the 8th string guitar and not play either of the 2 outer strings, just to get used to playing the guitar, the fingerboard width and all that stuff. And just that took me probably about a year to really feel comfortable just playing my 6th string stuff. But it was more like dipping my foot in the water eventually, like saying, okay, I think this is a spot where I know where the note is on the A string, so I'll add that to the top of the chord, or I'll add it as part of my line, or the low B string. The low B string was a little quicker, but no, I don't think, I don't know, maybe I initially, what I did go through was I was like a kid in a candy store figuring out voicings that had 8 notes. And I think that a little bit of that happened where I probably, maybe even still to this day, I sometimes play these huge, big voicings because I can. And I sometimes question myself, was that the most musically appropriate thing, or did I just do it because it's cool that I can,
Tom, have you, I mean, obviously you're a virtuoso musician, but has the fact that you've got an 8-string guitar set you apart and given you more of a profile in your region or area of America?
Yes, I do think that is the case. That 9-string player from Sweden that I mentioned, I remember him telling me the same thing. He said one thing that he noticed was that when he was in New York, it sort of was, kind of like something that people would remember him by.
Which is exactly why I'm getting a 10-string guitar.
Yeah.
You feel that it has, people don't forget you because, oh, it's the guy with 8 strings.
Right. Now, of course, that might not necessarily mean they remember who I am or that they're going to call me for a gig or something. But yeah, oh yeah, he's that 8-string guitar guy. Although I've been surprised that a lot of musicians who don't play guitar, I sometimes get the impression that they don't even realize my guitar has extra strings. I've had experiences where I've been playing with a particular musician for a couple years, and they look at my guitar. There's more than 6 strings on that, aren't there?
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, I found that fascinating. We've almost taken up the whole show just talking about that. And as I said earlier, I would love the chance to talk to you again because there's so many areas that I want to talk to you about. For now, I just wanted to talk about one other thing, which was if you could briefly talk about your Confessions of a Stupid Guitar Player.
Okay, that goes back to another, probably the only major hero of mine that I haven't mentioned is Mick Goodrick.
And can I ask you a supplementary question about that?
Sure.
I noticed in one of your videos you go into replacing the fourth, basically quartal harmony quite a lot. And am I right in thinking that Mick Goodrick put in the book, The Advancing Guitarist, that he was looking more at getting rid of the third and putting in the fourth, and I wondered if that had been a big influence on you?
Well, he definitely has been a towering influence on me, and as a matter of fact, a lot of my teaching is based on his work. I find that, let's see, how can I put this? I don't know if you're familiar with the voice leading almanacs that he put out in the early 2000s.
I just had that one book which I stole off a friend and I had to give him it back. The Advancing Guitarist thing was the only thing that I've looked at. But okay. I have seen him live, by the way. Him and John Abercrombie came to Edinburgh.
Oh, wow.
It was in the 90s. I was a young guy at the time. It was in either the 80s or early 90s, and I remember that concert. It was quite amazing. He looked like a sort of hobo, to be honest. But the playing was sublime. Anyway, sorry, I'll shut up and let you talk.
So anyway, those voice leading almanacs, the first time I ever saw one, I kind of had the same reaction as you. There were all these colored pages and rows of letters, and this looks like Greek. What could I ever possibly do with this? So I didn't buy the book or anything. And then a few years later, I have a friend named Bruce Saunders who's used to live in New York. He's in Austin now. But anyway, he had a couple of the pages from that book on his website in sort of like the lessons area. And I said, okay, let me take a look at this stuff and see if I can make heads or tails of it. And it was kind of like a light bulb went off. Maybe it was because I just had to look at like 1 or 2 pages and it didn't seem so intimidating. But I suddenly realized what the idea was behind the book and immediately bought both of the volumes that were available. And when the third one came out, I bought that one. And I really would have to say that a huge part of my harmonic concept, both as a player and as a teacher, is based specifically on those books. I think they're revolutionary. the blurbs that he got from famous players that are on the covers of those books are no exaggeration. It wasn't just like Mick's buddies, trying to make him look good. I really think, I think there's something from Steve Swallow saying if aliens come down and, want to see what future music looks like, they'll look to this book or something along those lines. Just really glowing things. People talking about how this is going to be historically relevant, in future times to come and so forth. And I really do think that's the case.
So why is it that when the world is in such a state of flux that the quartal sound has not come to the fore more, where, there is no distinct tonality, or there need not be?
Boy, that would be a really difficult question to answer, especially in a short amount of time. But I think that it probably goes back, into history of the way that classical Western European music evolved with tonality, and then the composers in the late 1800s and early 1900s sort of breaking from that tradition and trying to get beyond it and stretching it and pulling it beyond its boundaries. And all of a sudden, I think that sort of let loose. It was like a snowball effect. Like in the 20th century, it just grew by leaps and bounds, all of the, like, trying to go to more extremes and more extremes, to the extent of atonality and all the stuff that's happened since then. And it really, there wasn't like a 500-year period where chordal harmony was, had reigned superior, and all these traditions had been established. So in one sense, I guess my answer to that would be that I don't think there's been enough time for a common set of practices to be established for chordal harmony, or just, I guess, what I would consider modal harmony.
When we're talking about quartal harmony, we're talking about harmony that's built in intervals of a fourth, as opposed to tertiary harmony, which is built in intervals of a third.
Correct.
Would you say that maybe the problem for quartal harmony, the reason it hasn't dug in more, is that harmony in thirds is one? People just hear that and accept it as the de facto standard.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent that's true. Our tradition in the Western world goes back hundreds of years, and almost anybody, unless they grew up under a rock, that grows up in the Western world, it has heard those sounds their whole life and gotten used to hearing them. I do think that is very gradually changing slightly, just because of everything that happened in the 20th century and in the 21st century with sampling and electronic music. People now, I think it's less unusual to hear some of these strange harmonies, because there's people that will like put two samples of record mixed together that are in two different keys or something like that, and it doesn't sound as weird to the average person as it might have in 1900, let's say.
Well, I once played Clashing Sounds by Bela Bartok, and believe you me, that sounds odd. C and D flat majors at the same time.
Right, but I notice I said a little bit. I don't think that the mainstream public has developed a taste for 12-tone serialism or anything. So anyway, yeah, again, it's really hard for me to explain in a really short amount of time why I think that these voice leading books are so important. But one small thing that I could mention is, I think up until these books came out, as far as I know at least, exactly what you're talking about with chordal harmony, musicians just assumed that chordal harmony means notes that are stacked in fourths, period. Like, whenever somebody says play some fourth voicings, and, a lot of guitar players know those voicings where you're playing perfect fourths up and down the neck, or maybe an augmented fourth here or there to conform to the scale. And that's it. You thought that was all there was to chordal harmony. But Mick Goodrick explores every possible combination of every single one of those chords, basically. So just like you might do with a seventh chord, taking, you got C major 7, 4 inversions of closed position, 4 inversions of drop 2, 4 inversions of drop 3. And, this, of course, maybe not everybody knows what those terms mean.
They'll just have to watch your videos or my videos or someone's videos to find out, okay?
Right. So basically exploring every possible way to arrange the notes in those chords, and furthermore to voice lead from one chord to another within a given scale, like a major scale or a melodic minor scale or harmonic minor scale. Those are the three principal scales he explores through those books. And it's not just chordal harmony. He also has three other classes of harmony besides tertiary and chordal, which he calls them triad over bass 1, triad over bass 2, and spread cluster. But basically, if I've done anything that's added something to that, I think I have kind of figured out a way to make it a little easier for guitar players to learn this stuff. Mick Goodrick tends to be very, he's like Yoda, he gives you a really short sentence and expects you to figure out what it means, kind of.
Does he mix the words order up?
No, he doesn't do that. Like, practice you go shall. But on one hand, all his teaching materials are incredibly clear and well organized and precise. But he actually makes a point of saying, I'm only showing you so much of this stuff because it's up to you to figure out what to do with it, because he doesn't want a bunch of people imitating him. He wants, people to do their own thing with it. So what I hope to do, because like you, most people I know that have looked at those voice leading books just like run screaming from the building the minute they see them and don't want to have anything to do with them and can't make heads or tails of them. What I would like to do is to make them a little bit more easy to understand for people to get into without taking completely away the original intention of Mick Goodrick, which was for everybody to do something different with them. I feel like I've come up with, just in my own practice, and then it's borne itself out in my teaching, that I've been able to get these concepts across pretty well to students, that I've figured out ways to organize those materials that are a little bit more easy to grasp. What I figured out basically is that since I already know my seventh chords pretty well, I can relate all those other types of voicings to the seventh chords, and basically by altering one note. Like you said, the chordal harmony or 4-part fourths, I figured out if you just take any seventh chord and replace the third with a step up or a fourth, then you'll get a voicing of a chordal type voicing.
Listen, I could really talk with you. I know you're now running out of time, and we've been talking for probably around an hour. Would you come back and do another podcast at some time? Because we've not even got on to your Confessions of a Stupid Guitarist and a whole lot of it. Would that be possible, Tom?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to.
That would be brilliant. I think everyone listening to this around the world are going to be absolutely fascinated by what you've been talking about today, and we've only scratched the surface. So very exciting, very interesting. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me, and I look forward to talking to you again at some point in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I was happy to be here. It was a fun conversation.
Well, I did say at the top of the show that we didn't really get off the 8-string guitar, did we? We were all over the place, but I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed talking to Tom. I was really taken by how two people who are into guitar can have so many things in common in terms of their development and learning and the books and players that they listen to. As said, I'm really hopeful that I'll be able to get another interview with Tom and we can talk about all the other things that he does and his essays on being a guitar player. I think that would be really interesting. Anyway, I'd just like to thank you for listening to this show. It's really great to think of people around the world who are listening to this, and the numbers seem to be growing and growing. So please like and tell others and share, and we'll make it even bigger. If you have any requests of people that you would like to have interviewed, or indeed if you feel you have something to share with the world, get in touch. So from me, Jed Brocky, thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.